Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to deconstruct a pretty fascinating, and I gotta say, pretty intense framework for building wealth that's been popularized by investor Mark Moss. It's all about one big idea: making your money work a lot harder, a lot faster, and in more than one place at the same time.
So, let's just start with a really simple question that gets right to the heart of this whole thing. Is your money, right now, only doing one job? I mean, think about it. This one question completely challenges that traditional save your money and let it sit mindset that, let's be honest, most of us grew up with.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down today. First, we'll cover the core idea, the velocity of money. Then we'll get into the building blocks, the 4 stacks. After that, we'll see how it all works in the infinite loop. We'll look at the tools you need, a really different take on retirement, and then, and this is super important, we're going to hit the reality check and talk about the risks.
Okay, let's dive right into the deep end. The whole foundation of this strategy is this concept called the velocity of money. It's all about getting your capital moving. You don't want it just sitting on the sidelines. You see, the goal here isn't just about accumulating more money. It's about increasing how often a single dollar gets used for different jobs. I mean, think of your dollar like a Swiss Army knife. Instead of just being one blade, it's now a cash flow generator, it's a source of liquidity that you can borrow against, and it's an engine for long-term growth, all at once.
And this slide really puts it into perspective, doesn't it? On the left, you've got the way we're all taught to think. Your dollar is in a savings account, it has one job, and it's not a very exciting one. But on the right, you have this velocity model. That same exact dollar is now layered across different assets, doing multiple jobs at the exact same time.
So, you get the philosophy, right? Money in motion. But how do you actually build this? Well, it's a layered system. This isn't just some abstract idea, it's a structure with very specific parts.
So the whole system is built on these 4 layers, or stacks. First, you build up your liquidity. This is your stable base of capital, and often it's housed in a specific kind of life insurance policy. Second, you take that liquidity and you deploy it into assets that produce cash flow, think real estate. Third, you take the profits from that and recycle them into something with really high growth potential. And fourth, this is the magic, you create the loop by borrowing against your growing pile of assets to start the whole cycle all over again.
Okay, so you've got the layers, but how in the world does that become a self-repeating, so-called infinite loop? Let's pop the hood and look at the actual mechanics of how the money flows through this thing. You know, this quote from Mark Moss really nails it. The whole idea is that you don't let your capital get lazy. You keep it working. Some people call this asset recycling, and it's all about actively redeploying your money so it never stops moving.
And this right here, this is the engine room. Let's walk through it. 1, it all starts with surplus cash from a high income. You gotta have fuel for the fire. 2, you park that cash in your liquidity vehicle. 3, you use that liquidity for a down payment on something like real estate. 4, that property starts spitting out cash flow, it appreciates, and you get tax breaks. 5, you recycle all those benefits into a high-growth asset. 6, you then borrow against your entire growing asset base. And 7, you take those borrowed funds and you do it all over again. That's the loop.
Now, to make a complex machine like this actually work, you can't just use any old financial products. You need a very specific set of tools, and each one is chosen for what it can do inside this system.
So here's your toolkit. Each one of these has its own superpower. Cash value life insurance acts like your own private bank. Mortgages and HELOCs, that's a home equity line of credit, give you leverage. Real estate is your cash flow engine. An asset like Bitcoin is there for that explosive growth, and it also acts as collateral. And finally, you've got things like trusts to make the whole machine run smoother and with less tax friction.
So, how does this all translate into something practical, like, say, retirement? Well, it creates a way of thinking about retirement that is totally different from what you've probably heard before. So, here's the core concept, and this is a huge mental shift for most of us. Instead of selling off your assets to live on in retirement, which, by the way, usually triggers a big tax bill, you borrow against them. You use your pile of assets as collateral to create cash flow from debt, which in many cases isn't taxed like income.
So the model would look something like this. You'd spend your working years accumulating a big position in an asset. Then, when you're ready to retire, you take out loans against it at a really conservative level, say 50%, to give yourself a safety buffer. You live on that borrowed money, while in theory, your original asset keeps growing faster than the interest on your loan. It is absolutely a long-term bet that your asset growth will beat your debt cost.
Okay, let's take a deep breath. This all sounds incredibly powerful, right? But with any kind of complex financial engineering, there are points of failure.
So we absolutely have to pause here and talk about the very real risks and the potential downsides.
All right, let's just look at this neutrally, claim versus risk. That infinite loop relies on leverage, and leverage is a double-edged sword. It can amplify your gains, but it will amplify your losses just as fast. Borrowing against a volatile asset, you're looking at huge margin call risks. Using life insurance as your bank, if it's not set up perfectly, it can just be an expensive drag. And the whole thing, the entire strategy, hinges on one thing: your assets going up in value. And that is never, ever guaranteed.
So, who is this really for? This is so important. This is not a blueprint for everybody. It's a high-discipline framework for a very specific type of person. I think the best way to see it is as a stay-wealthy strategy, not a get-rich-quick one. You need a high, stable income, a stomach for some serious volatility, and the discipline to manage all this complexity when markets get crazy.
So ultimately, when you look at this whole system, you're left with a really big question. Is this a truly evolved blueprint for how to build wealth in today's world? Or is it just a high-stakes, high-leverage gamble that's completely dependent on asset prices going up forever? And that, right there, is the tension you have to think about.